In the summer of 1947, a farm family named the Cobbs stood on their porch in the New Mexico dark and watched a cluster of lights come down out of the sky and go silent behind their north field. There were 5 of them on that porch, a father, a mother, and 3 children. And by the time the sun came up, that field, their own field, that they had planted and walked for 18 years, was ringed with armed men, and they were told, on their own land, that they had seen nothing at all. Stay with me here. Because the youngest child on that porch, a boy of 9 named Daniel Cobb, lived to be 80, and he never changed a single detail of what he saw, and what he saw was not a weather balloon. I want to start with who these people were, because the account only matters if the witnesses do. Warren Cobb was a dryland farmer, the kind who could tell you the year by the look of the soil. His wife Lorna kept the books and the children and the faith. They were plain, church-going, unshowy people who had never in their lives sought a spotlight and never would. They did not sell this story. They did not call a newspaper. For most of their lives they barely spoke of it, even to each other. What we have comes decades later, from the children, and above all from Daniel, the boy of 9, who carried it clearest and longest, and who finally set it down for his own children before he died. Here is what they described, and the remarkable thing is how little the accounts differ. It was late, well after dark. The family was on the porch because the evening was hot, and the house was hotter, and then, in the northern sky, there were lights, not one, but a close cluster, moving together, too low and too slow to be a plane, and far too steady to be a shooting star. Daniel always said they were the color of a welding arc, a blue-white that hurt to look at. They came down at an angle, without a sound, and passed behind the rise at the top of the north field, and there was a flash, low and silent, that lit the whole underside of the clouds. And then nothing, no crash, no fire, just the crickets, which had stopped, starting up again. Daniel described the color the same way every time he told it, for the rest of his life. Not yellow, like a flare, not orange, like fire. A hard blue-white, he said, the color of the arc when his father welded a broken plough, a light with no warmth in it. He said you could not look straight at it, and that it left a green ghost on your eyes when it passed, the way a welder's arc does. He was 9 years old in 1947, and he had watched his father weld 100 times, and he knew that color, and he swore to the end of his days that it had come down out of the sky over the north field. I want you to stop and count who was actually on that porch. The father, the mother, Daniel, his older sister, and their grandmother, up late with a bad hip. 5 people, 1 sky, 1 set of lights. That matters. A dream does not have 5 witnesses. Bad nerves do not line up 5 pairs of eyes on the same point in the dark. A trick of one person's sight is not a trick shared by a 9-year-old and his father at the same second. Whatever fell, it fell in front of a whole household, all at once, and not one of them ever called it a plane. Now, here is where a skeptic has to slow down, and I am a skeptic. I want to say that plainly. Because lights in the night sky are the most ordinary of all extraordinary things. Meteors, flares, aircraft, ball lightning, the planet Venus low on the horizon. The sky is full of things that fool honest people, and a family primed by a strange summer could turn a bright meteor into a fleet. If all we had was 5 people who saw lights, I would file it and move on. But that is not all we have. Because of what happened on that farm the next morning, and for the 60 years after. Warren Cobb did what any farmer would do. At first light, he took his eldest son and walked up toward the north field to see what had come down on his land. He never reached it, because the field was already sealed. Overnight, without a sound anyone in the house had heard, military vehicles had come up the section road and ringed the top of the field, and men with rifles turned Warren Cobb back from his own gate. An officer Daniel remembered only as Captain Holt told Warren that there had been an aircraft incident, that the area was unsafe, and that the family was to stay in the house and speak to no one, on his own land, before he had even had his coffee. Consider the speed of that, because the speed is the whole thing. These lights came down in the dark, in open country, miles from the base, with no crash and no fire to guide anyone. And yet, before dawn, within hours, a military cordon was around that exact field, not searching for it, already there. That is not the response time of men looking for a downed weather balloon. That is the response time of men who knew precisely what had come down, and precisely where, and who were moving to seal it before the family that owned the ground could walk up the hill and look. There is a phrase Daniel used, near the end of his life, that has stayed with me. He said the soldiers did not act like men who had found something, they acted like men who had come to collect something. There is a difference, and a farm boy who had watched men round up cattle his whole life knew exactly what it was. You search for a thing you have lost. You collect a thing you were sent for. And the men on the north field, from the first grey light of that morning, moved like men who already knew what was up there, and had only come to carry it away. Let me tell you what the boy saw, because Daniel Cobb is the heart of this. A 9-year-old is not confined to the house the way a grown man is. Over the next 3 days, while the soldiers worked the north field, Daniel did what a curious farm boy does. He slipped along the irrigation ditch that ran the length of the property, below the sight line, and he got close. And on the second day, from the cover of the ditch bank, he watched them carry something down from the top of the field on a covered stretcher, and he said that as they loaded it into a truck, the cover slipped, just for a moment, and he saw what was on the stretcher. He said it was small, grey. And he said it had a head too big for its body, and eyes he could see from 50 yards away, black and wet and wrong. He was 9. He did not have the words for it then. He said he only knew, in his stomach, that it was not a person, and that he should not have seen it, and he crawled back down that ditch and did not stop shaking until dark. He told his sister June about it that same night, in a whisper, under the blankets, because he had to tell someone or burst. June was 13, and she believed him, because Daniel was not a boy who invented things. He was a boy who took machines apart to see how they worked. She kept his secret for 60 years. And when she finally spoke of it, in 2008, an old woman herself by then, she confirmed every detail of what her little brother had whispered to her that night in 1947. The size, the colour, the head, the eyes, details she could not have absorbed from the culture, because a 9-year-old had breathed them into her ear decades before the grey alien became a face the whole world knew. Now, I want to be careful, more careful than the story wants me to be. A 9-year-old at 50 yards, frightened, seeing a covered shape for a second in poor light, is not a reliable witness in the way a court would want. Memory at that age is vivid and unstable at once. And a child who grows up knowing his family's field was sealed by soldiers might, across 70 years, build a body onto a stretcher that carried only debris. I hold all of that. It is possible. But here is what makes Daniel Cobb hard to dismiss. He never grew the story. He never added to it. His account at 80 is almost word for word his account at 30 and at 15, and the family says it never once got bigger or better in the telling. Liars embellish. Daniel Cobb kept saying the same small, terrible thing, in the same flat voice, for 70 years. Let me talk about what happened to the Cobbs after, because this is where it stops being about lights. The soldiers were on the north field for the better part of a week. When they left, that ground was different. Warren Cobb said the topsoil had been stripped and replaced, badly, and that for years afterward nothing grew right on the top of that field. The wheat came in thin and pale in a long scar across the rise, exactly where the lights had gone down, and the family changed too. Warren was warned plainly that if they spoke of it, the consequences would fall on the farm, on the loan, on the children's future. Lorna Cobb, a devout woman, stopped going into town for months, and Warren, Daniel said, kept a loaded rifle by the door for the rest of his life, a man who had never before felt the need. That scar on the north field became a kind of clock in the family. Every spring, when the wheat came up, there it was, a long pale stripe across the rise where nothing grew as it should, marking the exact line the lights had followed down. Warren Cobb farmed around it for the rest of his life, and never spoke of it. Daniel said that, as a grown man, home for a visit in the 1970s, he had walked up to that stripe and dug into it with his hands, and found the soil beneath still wrong, loose, mixed, foreign, as though someone had dug the whole rise out and poured it back in a hurry. He took a jar of it home. He had it, the family says, until the day he died. Let me talk about the records, because this is where a careful person has to live. The Cobbs were real. The county has the deed, the tax rolls, the family plots. But of the events of that week there is nothing. No report of an aircraft incident on that section of land. No record of a cordon. Captain Holt, the name Daniel gave, appears in no base roster anyone has been able to locate. Perhaps a frightened boy misheard a name. Perhaps. But you begin to notice, in these accounts, that the officers who seal the fields and give the orders are always, somehow, the men who leave no trace. I went looking, as I always do, for the paper that would make this ordinary, a crash report, an incident log, a line in a base record placing an aircraft down on that section on that date. There is nothing. In 1994, and again later, researchers requested records for that area and that week, and were told the files could not be located. The Cobb farm is real, and on the map, and in the county ledgers going back to 1929. But the 1 week that mattered has been lifted cleanly out of the official memory of the place, the way a single week is lifted out of so many of these accounts. Always the same week, always the summer of 1947. Now, I want to be fair to the doubt, because the doubt is healthy. Maybe it really was an aircraft, a training flight down in open country, exactly the sort of thing the army would cordon and clean up quickly and quietly. Maybe the stripped soil was ordinary crash remediation. Maybe the boy, primed by a sealed field and frightened parents, supplied the grey body himself. Allegedly, the topsoil was replaced. Reportedly, the field was sealed by dawn. Supposedly, a boy saw a small grey thing on a stretcher. I cannot hand you any of it. Every physical trace is gone, as it always is, but an ordinary training crash does not usually require you to strip and replace the soil, or to threaten a farmer's loan, or to be already in position before the sun comes up. Let me widen the lens, because the Cobbs are not alone. I keep a list of accounts from that summer and that stretch of country, gathered between 1947 and 2019, from people who never met and had no plausible way to compare notes. A nurse, a guard, a rancher, a truck driver, and several families, like the Cobbs, who watched lights come down and woke to find their land sealed. The details rhyme with a consistency that unnerves me: the silent descent, the blue-white light, the flash with no sound, the cordon that arrived too fast, and, from a few of them, the small grey body carried down under a sheet. Consider one account set beside theirs. A neighbouring farmer named Merle Aldridge, whose land lay 4 miles east, told his pastor that on that same night he had watched a cluster of lights descend to the west, toward the Cobb place, and that 2 days later he had been turned back from a public road by armed men who would not say why. Aldridge never compared notes with the Cobbs. The two families were not close, and both had been warned to stay quiet. He died in 1969, and yet his account of that night, the direction, the cluster, the colour of the light, matches the Cobbs' account of the same hours from 4 miles away. 2 families, 1 night. The same lights, seen falling toward the same field, from 2 different farms. I have learned to pay close attention when 2 witnesses who never spoke agree not on the drama, but on the geometry. The Cobbs and Merle Aldridge did not agree that they had seen a flying saucer. Neither of them used those words. They agreed on a direction, and an angle of descent, and a colour, and a time, the dull, checkable facts that 2 people can only share if they were both looking at the same real object in the same real sky. You can fake a monster. It is very hard to fake a trajectory, independently, from 4 miles away, in the dark. I have spent a long time trying to explain that away, and I want to tell you honestly that I cannot. 2 families, 4 miles apart, unaware of each other, describing the same cluster of blue-white lights, descending to the same point in the sky, on the same night, is not a thing that fear alone produces. Fear can make one family see a monster in a meteor. It does not coordinate 2 families, in the dark, across 4 miles of farmland, into the same trajectory. That requires a real object, in a real sky, coming down in a real place, which is, of course, exactly what both families said it was. Consider the wider numbers too, and hold on to them, because I will come back to them. Between 1947 and 1954, at least 14 people connected to that summer's events relocated, went silent, or slipped from the record. Consider that in 1994, the Air Force issued its second official explanation for Roswell in 47 years, and that the two explanations do not fully agree with each other. Consider that a memo from 1950, declassified only in 2001, refers in one plain line to flying discs recovered in New Mexico and to the objects being of circular, disc-shaped construction, and that no one has ever explained why that memo exists if the only thing that fell that summer was a weather balloon. Every one of those facts, taken alone, has an innocent explanation. I know that. Balloons were flown, air forces revised their stories, old memos are ambiguous. I grant all of it, and I grant it freely. But they do not sit alone. They sit on top of a sealed field, and a stripped rise, and a boy in a ditch, and a mother on her knees, and a second family 4 miles east, and a stack of innocent explanations, piled that high, starts to look less like innocence, and more like a wall built on purpose, one plain brick at a time. I am not telling you a craft with a crew came down on the Cobbs' North Field. I want to be honest about the other side of it, because a skeptic has to carry both hands at once. Aircraft crash, the army cleans up, children frighten easily and remember badly. Families under pressure knit their separate fears into a single shared story over the decades. All of that is possible, and I hold it. But then I come back to the speed of that cordon, and the stripped field, and a boy's account that never grew in 70 years, and a second family 4 miles east who saw the very same lights fall, and the ordinary explanation begins to feel like the more strained one. Let me add one more thing, because it changed how I read the whole account. Daniel Cobb's older sister, June, remembered a detail Daniel never mentioned, because Daniel had been down in the ditch when it happened. She said that on the third night, their mother Lorna, the devout, unshakable one, came in from the porch white and would not say why, and that she found her mother later, kneeling by her bed, not praying the way she always prayed, but saying one thing over and over: God did not make that. Lorna Cobb never explained what she had seen from the porch that made her say it. She took it to her grave. But a woman does not kneel and tell God that he did not make a thing over a downed weather balloon. So here is where I have to leave it, and I am going to leave it honestly. I am not going to tell you it is true. I do not know that it is. What I have is 5 people on a porch who saw lights fall, and a field sealed before dawn, and stripped soil that scarred a rise for years, and a boy's account that never once changed in 70 years, and a second family 4 miles away who saw the same descent, and a devout mother who fell to her knees and swore what she saw had not come from any sky she knew. That is all I have. It is not proof, it was never going to be proof, and I am not going to insult a careful person by dressing it up as one. But I keep coming back to that porch, and to 5 people standing in the warm dark, watching a cluster of silent blue-white lights come down behind their own north field. Why would a family of plain, church-going farmers, who never sought a thing, carry the same account in near silence for 70 years, a boy and his sister and their parents all telling the same small story? Why would a downed weather balloon need a military cordon in place before sunrise, miles from any base? Why would the soil have to be stripped and carried away? And if the Cobbs made it all up, if it was only a frightened family's fiction, then what did a neighbor 4 miles east see falling toward their field that same night? And what did a boy watch them carry down under a sheet? And what did a devout woman see from her own porch that made her kneel and tell God it was not his? I do not know what that means, but I know that it means something. How many fields were sealed that summer, quietly, at dawn, and quietly opened again, and planted over, and forgotten? And who, tonight, on some porch in the dark, is watching a light come down that they will spend the rest of their life being told they never saw?